morning. Thank you for your patience in waiting for us.
We went to your other campus.
It's lovely.
To the wrong campus.
It's beautiful. We're super grateful to be here today. You all are a beautiful group. We're coming from both of us working in Boulder, where the events that we have like this are not quite as diverse as you guys look on the surface, at least. So this is amazing. Thank you. And it shows some of the good work that's happening here and some of the strengths that you have as a campus. So I'm Michelle Gabriel Parish. I hold a lot of hats. I'm the Energy and Climate Justice Manager at CU Boulder. So Energy and Climate Justice Manager. It's kind of a cool spot. I also am the founder of a community group, De Las Blows, that works on radioactive issues around Rocky Flats. Have any of you heard of Rocky Flats? No, a few yeses.
How many folks here, just a question, are from Colorado? Raised in Colorado?
Do you all know about Rocky Flats?
That's a whole nother.
That's a whole other presentation, but it was the heart of the nuclear industrial complex in the U.S. when we were in the middle of the Cold War. It still has a lot of contamination from making nuclear bombs out here. We also have been doing a bunch of work with artists and activists, getting people together to discuss how our issues are connected. And then I'm also a mama of 3 with Ramon.
So I'm Ramon Parish. I'm an instructor at Naropa University. It's like a kind of like Buddhist-based contemplative university to try to mix in mindfulness and meditation techniques with traditional liberal arts education. And I teach in their environmental studies department there.
So how many of you are here because you saw something about eco-justice and were like, yes, I want to be here? Okay. How many of you are here because some professor was like, you have to be here? Okay, it helps us know. How many of you feel like you are really passionate about the environment and sustainability? How many of you are passionate about social justice? Okay.
And how many people are just kind of indecisive and like, I don't know, curious maybe?
Does anybody feel like they have a strong sense of why we would be talking about these two things together? Is anybody like, yes, and want to say something about how they're connected? I know it's like a big class. Do you want to say it in the mic? I'll hold it if you want, like an interview. I just figured we were probably going to talk about environmental racism and things of that nature. Yeah, did you all hear that? Environmental racism? How many of you heard that term before? Rarely known, but yes, environmental racism. I think that's actually going to be part 2 of the presentation. Are we doing part 2?
Yeah, we are.
Okay, that's in part 2. We're going to be covering more surface stuff for now, but yeah, environmental racism is the idea that certain communities are burdened with environmental toxins more because of our race, and we also have access to less environmental benefits because of our race. So, that's actually been validated by the EPA and a presidential order. You want to? Okay. We'll talk about that later, it sounds like. So for now, we're just going to show you, hopefully you all can see the presentation, just kind of going over, glossing, why do we need to talk about these issues together? And why, if we want to have a strong sustainability movement, do we need to talk about social justice? Do we need to talk about diversity and inclusivity? Do we need to talk about equity? And also, what good is it going to be to have huge successes on the social justice side on a climate that's unraveling? And how are we going to have social justice gains in a place where resources are more and more scarce and people are really willing to possibly get more and more violent for them? So that's some of our questions. I think I'm going to skip that. So what is sustainability? Even in the traditional sustainability model, environmentalism as it is, there's this idea of the 3 pillars. They're voiced in all kinds of different ways, but I like the graphic on this one the most. So you get environmental, economic, and social. In here is sustainability. So if something is environmental, but it does not take into account economic or social issues, it's not actually sustainable. it's something else. You can say it's environmental, but you cannot say it's sustainable. The other thing is that this has been critiqued a little bit because it makes the three spheres. Does this have a picture? Green. Okay. It makes the three spheres seem equal and equally important. But actually, how can we say that our economic concerns are equal to environmental concerns or equal to our social concerns? They actually might be of different sizes, or maybe they're different lenses that we look through, and it's like a little lens going through a bigger lens into a biggest lens. That might be the more accurate thing. Maybe one of you guys will develop that in one of your projects. We're also looking in general, even this conception of nature. So we actually usually start out our presentations giving thanks to the original peoples of the land that we're on. Is this the Cheyenne or Arapaho and Ute lands? That's what it is where we are. But I think down here there's a little bit more. Yeah. And maybe, was there Kyle? No one knows? Okay, so first homework assignment from your time with us is you all need to know, by the end of the day, who are the original peoples of this land. Okay? So what is this conception even of nature and of separating ourselves from nature? That's actually a relatively new concept, that nature is elsewhere from where we are. A lot of peoples throughout time have seen it as something more integrated and embedded. And it makes sense because this pyramid structure is such a structure that our culture likes. And if you see, it's got, I like this image because it has a man on top and then underneath it a woman. And our culture is set up like this. And a nature-centric view of the world sees that all these things are interconnected and doesn't have anybody at the top of this little pyramid. Okay, so we're going to look at, often when we do these presentations, we're talking to people who either are passionate about sustainability and want to know why justice matters, and then every once in a while we also have people who are passionate about social justice and want to know why should we incorporate sustainability into our work. So this is kind of slanted to the people who are already into sustainability, but also really to all of our communities, because there's a lot of myths and stereotypes about who cares about the environment. I want to ask you guys, who can name some really famous, maybe energy or sustainability or climate leaders in the country right now? You're just stretching. Yeah, go for it. Bill Nye? Bill Nye, the science guy. Bill Nye, the science guy. Okay, a couple more. Who do you guys know of in the environmental world? Al Gore.
Environmental leaders.
Al Gore was number one for a long time when we did these. Al Gore. He started the Climate Reality Project. It's worth looking up. Elon Musk, was he? Leonardo DiCaprio? Elon Musk owns Tesla. You all heard of Tesla? Okay. One more? Okay. We've successfully named 4 white guys, and that's okay. Those are really considered leaders in the sustainability field, and the sustainability field has developed into this way where it is kind of enamored with technology, and we've really moved from an environmental movement that was considered to be edgy to something that's much more professional. So let's look at who actually cares about the environment. I'm going to zip through a couple of slides on this because we are running behind, but they took a poll a few years ago of what issues what issues voters of color are concerned about. And they also compared it with white voters. So who is most concerned about pollution of rivers, lakes, and streams? African American voters. Global warming, 65% of Latino voters are concerned about it. Who's concerned about toxins and pesticides in our food and water? 63% of African Americans, followed closely by 61% of Latino voters, and only 38% of white voters. How about pollution of the oceans? Voters of color as a whole, which I think maybe they had surveyed Native people separately, because I don't know how these numbers came out. 62% of voters of color, and only 39% of white voters. Let's look at some more myths and stereotypes. When you think about Latinos, what is the first issue that comes to mind politically? Like, what do you think Latino voters are concerned with? Immigration. So I'm Latina, that's what I thought, and to be fair, this survey was taken right before the election, so I do think that these numbers may have changed drastically, but they took a survey of Latino voters, and they found that immigration was actually, look, number 5. And 4 of the things above immigration reform were environmental. 90% of them wanted to strengthen the Clean Water Act. We want to increase conservation of water, reduce smog, then immigration reform, and then we go right back to the environment with protecting the national wildlife, then developing clean energy, more clean energy, then combating terrorism. So this isn't really what we're normally told about in terms of who cares about these issues and why they're important to us. This essay, or this survey, is from 2017, so just this year ago. They asked people, this actually comes from a survey, they were trying to find out if there were gender differences in the ways that people approach the climate and the environment, and climate change specifically. And they found that there was not much of a difference. And then one of the researchers said, well, we're finding no difference, but what if we break this down into race? I think we are finding a huge difference. So this was not the intention of this original survey. This is with Climate America, or Eco America. And they found that there was a big discrepancy in terms of women of color and white women and their actions that they've personally taken in the past year around environmental issues. Who has discussed climate change with family or friends? 82% of Latina women have. What? Okay. 75% of African American women, and only 68% of white women. That's still a majority for all of them, so that's good. Who's discussed climate change with colleagues? Now Latina women are 53%, African American women at 44%, white women jumps down 33%, and men in general 43%. We've spent some time looking at this one because this is the one that students have the most questions about, saying why is there such a jump in this one? And the only thing that I've really come up with, and this is not, based on the survey, I'm not one of the researchers, but what I think is interesting about this question is that there's some risk in it. It's one thing to talk to your friends and family about climate change, especially because you know your family. You know who it is you could talk to about this and who you can't. But to discuss it with colleagues, now you're talking about what if you make somebody mad that has the ability to make your workplace a tough place for you? What if they have the ability to say something to your boss when they are your boss? So this one has a lot of risk in it, which I think is why we see all of the numbers go down. Contacted or voted for an elected official. This time African American women are in the lead at 48%. 48% of African American women are reporting they've contacted an elected official, and it was around something having to do with the environment or climate. Who has shifted toward, so with that one, I just want to say, so think about people wanting to have like a phone banking night around the environment. You might actually have more success looking at the Latino and African American communities than you would with the white communities. But again, I don't think that's most of the narrative that we have. Who has shifted toward biking or walking? 49% of African American women. And who has shifted toward public transit? 43% of African American women. That one's duplicated. Who has the lowest emissions? Do you think that Al Gore and Elon Musk have really low carbon footprints? I bet you their footprints are really, 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 really high. Especially Elon Musk is trying to get us off the planet. That takes a lot of carbon. Now, I will say, I think they're doing a lot of good with their carbon footprint, and that's something that we often have to balance out. So I'm actually not saying anything bad about them, and I really like, especially the Climate Reality Project. Bill Nye is doing great work. All of these people are doing great work. When I've been working on this stuff with the county of Boulder, part of what we looked at was, what is this narrative that tells us that these guys are the hero, when who has the smallest carbon footprint? This is research out of London that they extrapolated and said that they believe this to be true, and at least all of the developed nations, that the difference between the top 10% and bottom 10% earners in terms of carbon footprint can basically make or break the climate deal. Right? If we all behave like low-income and low-wage workers, we actually would be on track to do a lot of good with the climate. That means we're having smaller houses, fewer cars, less travel, more public transit, more carpooling. These are all the things that people try to get other people to do. More turning the lights off. I don't know if any of you were raised in a household where, I don't know if it was an environmental or money thing, but it's just like you turn the lights off when you leave a room. How many of you were raised in that environment? Like, did any of you get like a chancla or even like a spanking when you leave the lights on? Right, that ethic, we've compartmentalized what we consider to be sustainability and what we consider to be like social into these different realms, even though they're actually intersecting a lot more. And we would do well to learn more from low-income community members. So one of my programs, we actually go into affordable housing and we install light bulbs and shower heads and faucet aerators and talk to people about sustainability, but we also tell them this stuff. We say, do you know who the biggest climate leaders in Boulder are? It's not all the people with Teslas. I don't know if Colorado Springs is like this. We have a lot of Teslas in Boulder. Like a lot of Teslas. We used to play a game where we count how many we see in a day because our kids love them. They know what all the different models are. And we stopped because we're like, there's another one, there's another one, there's another one. And people see that as climate leadership, but also there's something about conserving and the financial position that a lot of us have been put in, or the cultural ethics that we've been raised with that help us curb our footprint. And yet when you look at the field, the environmental field, this is from a survey that came out, which if you're questioning what I'm talking about, if you're excited, if you're upset, I invite you to look at the Green 2.0. If you just look at Green 2.0, they have a massive survey that they did, and it's full of infographics. It's really easy to understand. But basically, they went through and researched all of the top environmental organizations in the U.S. based on who's making the most money as an organization and who has the largest staff. And they found that all of the big environmental organizations were run by white men. And again, this isn't to say something bad about white men. It was to say, why is it that we find that in these organizations, as responsibility increases, diversity decreases? And in some of these organizations at the intern level or the entry level, they had a lot of diversity. But in every one, as you went up the power chain and the income chain of the organization, diversity went down. They are also talking here about how, we hear a lot about how STEM fields are lacking in diversity. Have you all heard that? Like science, technology, engineering, math, sometimes they throw an A in there for the arts. They're saying that the issues in STEM around diversity are actually not as bad as the environmental organizations' lack of diversity. So here's people of color in the U.S., here's people of color in STEM, science and engineering fields, and here we are in environmental organizations. So it's just to sort of start talking about why is that, and hopefully we have time to get into some of it. Van Jones, have you all heard of Van Jones? Who's Van Jones? Oh, Ron Finley.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay, they're friends. Van Jones, I'm partly asking because now he's a commentator on CNN. But before that, he wrote this book called The Green Collar Economy, which we have a copy of here just for you to look at. That really was saying we have to have these movements come together. Why? It's the only way either movement is going to be successful. You will not get to the climate goals and sustainability goals that you have without everybody. And you will not get to social justice goals when people are fighting over oil and water and food. It's not going to happen. So he was actually the Green Czar for a minute in the Obama administration and was considered a political martyr who left the office. But in the meantime, he did a lot of amazing work. And this book, The Green Collar Economy, I invite you all to at least check out the introduction at least his first chapter. It's so good. He really talks about the need to divorce ourselves from the dirty economy and from poverty at the same time. So he says, what is this division between what is considered environmental and social justice? Maybe part of it is about privilege and perspective, the way that privilege in societies shapes how we see and frame and talk about these problems. So he created this quadrant. We just filled it in with pictures. So he said that richer and wider communities see the problem as polar bears, ice caps. Does that seem familiar to you as an environmental thing? It's like save the polar bears, turn the lights off. And Antarctica, and things that, if you think about it, they're all really far away. Like, most of us, except for maybe at the zoo, are never going to see any of this stuff. And then the solutions are often framed as technological solutions. Solar panels, and then of course we went and added a Tesla. That's seen as a solution, and that's not to say that's not part of the solution. But again, for poor communities, for black and brown communities, this is not usually any kind of answer to any kind of problem. And the problem, as he says, for brown and gray problems, they look like, this was Katrina, this was Houston. I keep having to update this slide. Now here's Maria. This is what the problems might look like to communities of color. And in those surveys I was showing you earlier, they also asked people, do you feel like climate change has impacted your life? And by far, people of color were responding yes over everybody else. And then the solutions, I don't know if any of you have ever been to Denver, where we have Mo Better Green Marketplace. Originally the picture was of a farmer's market in Oakland, but I realized we have a hero right here doing this work in Denver. So, a farmer's market, especially in a low-income community where this was founded in food deserts in Denver, it could be an economic solution, it could be a health solution, it could just be community building, or maybe it's environmental and climate. You actually can't really tell. This solution is solving all of these different problems at once for the community. You know, I always think about, like, where do you think her funding comes from? Where do you think that the funding for these farmers markets in Oakland come from? Like, is it economic development? Is it community building? At all of her farms, she's got DJs, yoga, dancing, all kinds of stuff that you may not think of as belonging in a farmer's market. Also, in order to do this market, she realized that there were some big gaps in her community. First of all, no one was growing food, so how are you going to have a farmer's market with no farmers? So she had to train the community in how to start growing food in their backyards, which they loved. Why? Partly because they're growing food, but partly because they had a place to go start making a little bit of money from growing tomatoes in their backyard. And then also she'd be like, hey, can you grow, this kale for me, for example? And they're like, sure, but they don't actually know how to cook it. So now there's cooking demonstrations as part of this. So it's this holistic thing. So anyway, I just want to bring this up as, do you see how these issues are framed differently, but they're actually dealing with all of the same issues? So we just have these communities, we have these two movements that in essence, if you took a 10,000-foot view, have a lot of the same goals. But they're speaking totally different languages, and sometimes they're even clashing. No? Okay. So, can you tell me how much time you have? Okay. Should we pause maybe for a second and see if you all have any reflections on this before we go on? Is anyone burning with a question or wondering how this can be, or does this seem natural and you're just like, yes, I knew this? Yeah. Nothing burning? Okay. So I wanted to go over some more about who do we consider to be leaders in the environmental field, and even some of this thing about language, how we use these different words to describe different things. So have you all heard of tree huggers? I love that always elicits a laughter. It's like this funny thing. It's something to laugh at. Tell me, what does a tree hugger look like? No, let's say it. It's okay. What's a tree hugger look like? Dreads. Okay, dreadlocks. What's that? Stereotypical hippie? Huh? Like you maybe even know where they shop? Where do they shop? Huh?
Barefoot.
Barefoot often? It's kind of a dismissive term. You don't usually call someone a tree hugger because you think they're really awesome. No? It's kind of someone who's out of touch with reality. In Boulder, we have a lot of people who embrace the term. I actually don't have a hard time embracing the term. I'm like, okay, I can see that I'm a tree hugger in some ways. Especially once I learned the history of the word tree hugger. So it turns out the original tree huggers were these women in India. They were these Chipko women, and they were in this region that was up against logging. And the loggers came in, and the women said, wait, you can't log these trees. Trees are our ancestors. We get our air, our water, and even the land from the trees. If you cut the trees, we'll have nothing left. Some of the logging happened and continued. And do you know what happened everywhere where they were logging? Erosion was crazy. So water started to just run off and wasn't retained in the environment. Springs dried up. So they were right, no water. We know that trees provide air. And even the land was washing away when the water came through. It also turns out that trees in some places have this amazing ability to seed clouds. Have you all heard of cloud seeding? Yeah, it's this, often thought of as this huge, geotechnical solution for climate change or for droughts, is that we could, fly planes into clouds and have heavy metals or chemicals that will make those clouds release their rain. Well, it turns out that some trees actually have bacteria in their leaves that do seed clouds and have it rain. So a lot of places where you deforest an area, you actually do get less rain and water. And then when it does come through, it just washes right away. So these women were fighting really hard for the land, water, air. And these trees, look how big they were. It took several of the women to hug them. This is Gwana Devi, their leader. Many of these women were beheaded in the square where they were working, or where they were living. So that's just kind of to speak to, I don't think they were just trying to protect the trees. This was a matter of survival. This was a matter of cultural survival. This was a matter of actual physical survival. What would they do without the land they're on, water, and clean air? What would they actually do? They'd be forced to relocate. So in the end, they were successful, but it kind of became this demeaning term in the U.S. that signifies people who look really different than these women from India. When you all think of the beginning of the environmental movement, if any of you are in that world, is there anyone who comes to mind as sort of a leader or a starter or a sparker of the environmental movement? There's probably a bunch of right answers. John Muir, the conservationist. Yeah. Anyone else? Are you all? Yeah.
I did a project on Wangari Maathai.
Wangari Maathai.
We developed something that was
Yeah, absolutely. Wangari Maathai, she's in the slides later, for sure. She's amazing. Kenyan. So, in the way that I was taught about environmentalism, I was always taught about Rachel Carson and Silent Spring. Have you ever heard of that? She wrote this book about pesticides and the silent spring. What will happen when these pesticides move through the environment and end up killing all of the birds? So I don't know if you noticed, we start off with that Childish Gambino song. Do any of you recognize it? Summer. It's pretty good. You should check it out. It's our favorite climate change song right now. It actually is about climate change. So you have to watch it without the video, because the video is really distracting. It has all kinds of famous people in it, and cameos by all kinds of rappers and hip-hop heads, so you kind of listen to that, or you watch that instead of the words. But he's actually talking about climate change, and he has that moment where the sound stops, and he's talking about no sound. He's talking about that moment that Rachel Carson is talking about. Is what about when the birds die? There's not this constant churn of sound in the environment. So she wrote that book. It was published in 1962. At the same time, in 1962 was the start of the United Farmers Workers Movement. Have you all heard of these two? Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez? They were fighting for farm worker rights. What a lot of people don't really think about, especially in terms of sustainability, is that they started out talking about the harms of pesticides. They were saying that pesticides are actually harming the farm workers. We're being harmed by working with these pesticides. But they didn't stop there. They said, and the land is being harmed by these pesticides. And then they said, and you know what, this hurts everybody, because the people who eat this food, no matter how wealthy they are, no matter how far away they are, no matter how many privileges they have, no matter if they're the boss of this farm, are also eating these pesticides. And it's creating damage in the whole chain. Cesar Chavez was actually a vegetarian, which a lot of people also don't know. We usually think of that as being with the tree huggers, right? So here you have these two movements that are being thought of as totally separate, starting in the exact same year. And yet I've never, unless they've already seen my presentation, I've never had anybody say that who helped start an environmental movement. I've never heard Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta mentioned. But if you go to a social justice conference and you're like, who was organizing farm workers, you for sure are going to hear all about them. And there you might even say, do you know they were working on environmental issues? You know, pesticides, this is a clear environmental issue. If you ask people to name the top 10 environmental issues, usually pesticides is on that list. But these two are not considered, and this movement is not considered a leader in this movement. So that's something for us to reconsider, especially because the social justice movement, which does not start here, of course, has a lot to teach the environmental movement, which is generally newer. It has a lot to teach. So that's another reason that these movements need to work together. And of course, it's older than that. It's Chief Seattle. How many of you have heard of Chief Seattle? Okay. He was considered, he's someone that people in the environmental world are constantly quoting. And I can see why some of the quotes attributed to him are pretty impressive. I really like this one. When the green hills are covered with talking wires and the wolves no longer sing, what good will the money you paid for our land be then? So he was an environmentalist way before there was any kind of environmental movement. And also, if we think about those three spheres of sustainability, of economy, environment, and equity, or people, he's really covering those, right? He's saying, what good is money when I don't have my hills, I don't have my water, and you have these talking wires all over the place? I just love this one of the talking wires because we're all even more connected to our phones than we were when I first started learning about him, right? When I first started learning about him, it was, yeah, we have these phones at home, and now we're walking around with them at all times. He also asked how you can buy or sell the sky, the warmth of the land. The idea is strange to us. If we do not own the freshness of the air and the sparkle of the water, how can you buy them? Every part of the earth is sacred to my people. So this is also really amazing to me because if we look at what has happened to Native people on this land, we actually get a sense of where we might be going sometimes. And if you see, he's talking about how strange it is that people are buying and selling land and the resources underneath them. But he's also talking about the air, which when I was growing up would seem weird, but now we're actually talking about doing carbon taxing. There's actually talk of, and in some places it's already underway, where you can trade basically clean air for dirty air. Companies have credits, pollution credits, that they can buy and sell to each other. They can be like, oh, I bought $15 million worth of pollution credits, but I only used $10 million worth. Do you want to buy the last $5 million worth cheap to another company? They're just buying and selling pollution credits. And there's talk of a carbon tax. I'm not saying whether it's good or bad, but that's so weird. You know that we all exhale carbon, right? We're all breathing that out. We're all made of that. And it's about to be taxed. This is something metaphysically to think about because it might be good in some ways. It's just something that it seems like he knew what was about to happen. So also wanted to put this slide in to talk about the origins of this fight of the connection between sustainability and social justice. And this is from when settlers used to be paid in the United States for buffalo skulls. And I'm sure you all have heard that sometimes people would even ride the trains with guns out the windows, just shooting buffalo as they went. They weren't going to eat them, they weren't going to benefit from it at all. They were just shooting the buffalo. You could say that was one of the first acts of biological warfare, maybe. This was the primary food source for all of the Plains Indians, and even a lot of the non-Plains Indians who were trading for buffalo. The hills, when Europeans first came to the Plains, they were like, it's like a moving, brown, rumbly forest. You can't even see the ground, there were so many buffalo. And they managed to kill so many of them off. And why did they do that? It was the food source for the people of this place. But also there was a lot more to it, because you can imagine that they had a different idea about what food source is, right? We're really disconnected from our food. They were right there next to their food, seeing it go from alive to death. A lot of hunters talk about that here in Colorado. Have any of you hunted? Yeah. Isn't it kind of an intense moment when you're there with the animal when it's dying? Yeah. And I imagine that you all probably value that meat more than a lot of us do, that just like go through a drive-up window and get meat from somewhere that we don't know, processed by someone we don't know, killed by someone we don't know. So it's this really intense relationship. In order to hunt, you probably have to stop and know a little bit about the animal. You can't just randomly go out there with a gun, even though they kind of could at this time. And so there's really a connection there that happens. So for them, seeing these mountains of skulls was not just, oh no, that was our food source. It was kind of like, that's our kin. We know these creatures. We've lived with these creatures. These creatures have been our environment. The floor wasn't their environment, the buffalo was the environment. So it was also, I think, something more spiritual than we can really describe. But even if we can't get with that, you can just look at this pile of skulls and know that something wrong was going on here.
What would they use the skulls for?
What would they use the skulls for? Proof that they had killed a buffalo. Yeah, the people who were purchasing it, so it was usually the U.S. government paying people to kill buffalo. And it was because they wanted to kill off the food source of Native people. Yeah, so they weren't using this for anything. So that's another question, actually, that for me comes up with sustainability. My brother and I sometimes have debates about this stuff. We actually are really different when it comes to this. And, we were talking about energy the other day and the need to solve our energy problems, which is totally true in terms of solving our climate problems. But part of my question sometimes is, we're making all these sacrifices in terms of climate, but for what? If we were making the types of sacrifices that we're making climactically because we needed to, because we need to save lives, because we need hospitals to stay open, that makes some sense. But sometimes we're just ruining the climate because we felt like driving around the block. Sometimes we're ruining the climate because we just felt like leaving the lights on. Sometimes we just felt like taking a longer shower. Sometimes we felt like just buying that extra thing at Target because it was cheap, not even because you needed it. And I bet you don't know where that thing is 6 months later. So we're all a part of that. So this isn't to say like somebody is bad. We're all a part of that. And that's another thing that the social justice movements teach the environmental movements, that you have to look at systems. You can't just look at individual actions. You can't end racism by being nice to someone of a different race. Even though that's nice. But you're probably going to have to look at the institutions. You're probably going to have to enact some policy in order to make it happen. Tell me the time. How much time we got? We're at the end. Okay, so I really want to hear from you all. These some questions, comments. Yeah, can I give you the mic?
So just like a follow-up with what you just said. I view this as, what are we really willing to live without? That's like what I try to ask myself daily. Like, what can I go without that I absolutely don't need? I mean, the bigger picture that I see is that I need the world. I I will no longer exist. Everything around me that I live off of, that I utilize, that I rely on to drive down the road. I drive down roads because the earth exists. I breathe and I'm alive talking because I'm breathing the air that is produced by everything around me. I cannot live without that. But I can live without a lot of the waste products that we pick out of the grocery stores. You know, I can live without my lights on all day and multiple, electronic devices going on in my house. I can live without washing my clothes over and over and over again, taking 30-minute showers. You know what I mean? That's what I just try to ask myself all the time. You know, when you look at it, like I was just doing a project for my environmental science class, where we had to pick 3 categories on, what we can improve our footprint with, and just overall just awareness of our impact on our environment. Mine was waste. The others were the energy that we use, and then I believe my final one was, what's that? Well, let me go on the first 2. So, as far as energy, I definitely figured out that we use a lot more than we really need. You know what I'm saying? I used to be one of those dudes that would just leave the lights on all the time. I used to be one of those, people that would just run my appliances over and over again. But when I actually did calculations as to how much I'm using and where the energy comes from and what those factories and whatever or whatnot produce because of it, I'm like, wow. And I'm one of thousands of people around me who could be doing even more than I am. So it's eye-opening, as well as going to the grocery store and plastic bags, for example. We go to the store and, it's so common, it's so easy to just throw all your groceries into 30 plastic bags. And then, you end up stuffing them under your sink, or you just throw them in the trash. And then now, you scroll through Facebook and then you find a well that's full of them. And it's just eye-opening. So that's what I ask myself daily. It's what can I live without? And hopefully that's those little small changes that I make every day do something for the big picture. That's what I would say.
Yeah, thank you. Imagining 300 million people doing that. We can all make little trimmings off the top. And really we need to. I kind of feel like we have the responsibility to. Generally in the U.S., we don't like that model of what can I do without, right? This is something that both movements deal a lot with. People don't want to change that stuff. Sorry, I'm fighting a cold. Something that's not often talked about is that we also have a lot more than we think we do. Just let my voice be terrible for a minute.
You're okay.
We have a lot more than we think we do. We had a friend researcher come out to Denver a few years ago. And we asked him to measure how much water falls on our rooftops versus how much water we use domestically. More water falls on Denver roofs than what we use to flush our toilets, take showers, do all of this stuff. So yes, there's also some cutting back that we each need to do right now, especially as we work to change some of the systems. But also there's so much more abundance than we think there is. There's so much more water here in Colorado than we think there is. You can look at this building, I'm going to go ahead and guess. We have all this massive square footage. Water falls on this roof, and then we shove the water away as quickly as we can into the gutters, right? Because they're water's bad for the foundation, so we get rid of the water as quickly as we can. It creates a stormwater problem. It harms the rivers because they can't handle all this water coming in at once, and it comes with all this sediment, particulates. And then next day we're irrigating our flowers with water that we pump from the western slope. So there's also some systematic stuff that needs to change, and that's something that if you don't feel personally, hopefully we all feel personally called to make the changes we can each make. It also takes some rethinking of the way that we do things, looking at the ways of how do people get water in desert areas, right? Because there's people who've been living in desert areas since time immemorial, and they're still there. How did they do that? So we got to learn some of those systems, and also recognize that there is some regeneration that happens with the earth. It happens with our bodies, right? You just get sick. Sometimes you're even better after you get sick. What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. That's true for the environment as well. So hopefully that's something that we can learn from all kinds of diverse communities, and that's another reason that it's so important that we have diverse communities at the table when we're talking about environmental issues. And I can see that Conrad's about to take this mic from me. So thank you all. I think we have a few more things happening today, so hopefully you can join us for some more of this conversation. Either way, please keep digging into it for yourself and your community. Thank you.
So we're going to, for Jay Akeley's class, and I believe another class, we're going to head over to